I teach both in graduate fine arts as well as the undergraduate program in sculpture. I want to welcome everyone to the California College of the Arts Bachelor of Fine Arts Conversation, in which graduating seniors have the opportunity to present their work and ideas. Me and my colleagues at CCA are thrilled to celebrate the graduation of the seniors of 2021. Not only is this a considerable achievement because of the rigorous requirements of our program, but also because of all the considerable obstacles the students face because of the pandemic. The students have shown remarkable persistence, courage, and resilience throughout this year of learning through digital media alone. I would like to thank all of you for supporting these students through their 4 years at CCA, but in particular during their very difficult final year. One of the things I have been speaking with the students about throughout this period is how important the arts are at moments of social distress and political crisis. Culture in general and visual art in particular have unusual capacities to bear on the disturbance as well as the confusions and contradictions of what we've been experiencing over the past year or more. And each of the graduating students have taken those profound and complex things on in their own creative ways, as you will see. I would like to acknowledge the chair of sculpture, community arts, and the individualized program, Peter Szyminski. He has helped all of us stay focused through his oversight of all that we do, as well as through his thoughtful and caring attitude. I would also like to thank Jamie Austin, Director of Exhibitions and Public Programs, and Bryndis Hafthorstoder, a gallery manager, for organizing this event. Today, 5 artists will be presenting for 10 minutes each. The students are Cameron Lindquist, Freddie Lopez, G. Keen, Carlos Daniel Perez-Boza, and Jordan Barram. We'll present in that order. After each presentation, we will have comments from 2 invited respondents. Our 2 respondents are Sara Mameni, Assistant Professor, Comparative Ethnic Studies at UC Berkeley. Professor Mameni received her PhD in art history at the University of California at San Diego, and her BFA in fine arts at Emily Carr Institute of Art and Design in Vancouver. Professor Mameni is an art historian specializing in contemporary transnational art and visual culture in the Arab Muslim world, with interdisciplinary research on racial discourse, transnational gender politics, critical race and post-colonial theory, among other things. 2 of her recent publications are What Are Iranians Wishing For? Queer Transnational Solidarity in Revolutionary Iran, in Signs, Journal of Women in Culture and Society. And her other recent article is Dermopolitics, Erotics of the Muslim Body in Pain, which was published in the Women and Performance Journal. Our other respondent is Shaelyn Haynes, who is San Francisco based and pursuing an MA in curatorial practice at CCA. Shaelyn also received a BA in interdisciplinary field studies, concentrating on the role of art in developing political societies from the University of California at Berkeley. Shaelyn has held curatorial support roles at the CCA, Wattis Institute, the Feminist Art Coalition, and the Berkeley Art Museum. We are just about to begin our presentations. The audience should press the mute button on their screen now to be sure to not interrupt the presentations. Also, any thoughts or affirmations in response to the student's presentation should be put in the chat. Uh, I'd like to present the CCA land acknowledgement. CCA campuses are located in Huichin and Yelamu, also known as Oakland and San Francisco, on the unceded territories of Chochenyo and Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. Okay, so we'll begin the presentations with Cameron Lindquist. And Cameron is a sculptor from Los Angeles who is currently working in Greenfield, Massachusetts. He has asked me to tell you that his imagination is only matched by his fear of this moment. Cameron.
Hi, guys. Thank you, Brian, for saying that. I wasn't sure if you would. So let's get this show on the road. Thank you all for being here tonight. It means a lot to me to see all of your faces, even those of you who have chosen to keep your cameras off. And it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you my most recent project, Being As Is Required. It's taken a little bit of time to come up with where to start about talking about this piece, because it's been about 6 months in production, and then it's been about 1.5 years of trying to make sense of since that point. The objects themselves are 3D scans of human figures. I was doing busts originally with the 3D scanner, being a figurative sculptor originally. So when I was doing the busts, I was really caught up in kind of this thought of digitization and what it means to be digitized in reality. But then I went to the Rodin Garden at Stanford and got really kind of blown away by the emotive nature of the figure. And I was in a performance class, which got me really thinking about the way figurative sculpture kind of performs humanity. Taking that and an inspiration from Greek and Roman sculpture's ability to capture kind of a narrative or a legacy in a singular moment of a person doing an action or some kind of gesture with their body. This conversation, however, it started with just an idea to capture the performance of existence, but that performance became a much different conversation in COVID-19 with the way our existences were being kind of contained to our homes and our individual bubbles. So I began taking the 3D scanner that I got on loan from CCA and turning it to the people in my bubble to kind of capture just a bit of what it was to be stuck inside the pandemic, and the kinds of things that were going on during that. That eventually grew into a very big idea, which was to turn these into monumental scale objects that would then kind of act as memorials to the pandemic. But the further I thought about that, the more I started to think about kind of the obsolescence of monuments in a post-colonial society. And so these objects started to turn into kind of a reflection piece for me onto what it means to make a monument, or why people make monuments, and why would they need monuments in a world where we aren't trying to steal land and power from each other at every turn of events. The objects themselves are 3D prints coated in a thin layer of bronze to create kind of an illusion of materiality and of value. I think this artificiality becomes kind of an interesting metaphor for a lot of things we interact with in our day-to-day lives, and the ways that things aren't exactly what they seem ever in our current cultural climate. And that is pretty much all I have to say about those. I'd like to take a quick minute to do some thank yous. I'd like to thank my parents exponentially for giving me the opportunity to go to the school. I know it wasn't easy for them, but they did it, and it's meant the world to me. I'd like to thank my cousin Benny, who's also in the audience tonight. Without him, I would have been homeless my first semester, or first year technically, and it just meant the world to me that he put himself on the side to help me progress as an artist and as a person. I'd like to thank Zach Miller, who's also in the audience. He has been the biggest help with figuring out this materiality and these processes. And yeah, that's all I got.
Okay, thanks, Cameron. Our next presenter is Freddie Lopez. Freddie is a queer Chicanx interdisciplinary.
Brian, can you invite, I think now we have 10 minutes for Sara and Shaelyn to give responses and be in conversation.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Sara, I think we have 10 minutes for the, before we hear from Freddie, we have 10 minutes for the respondents to reply to Cameron's work. And Sara, perhaps you could go first.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Cameron, for sharing your work with us and for bringing your work to this place under this, very difficult year. We're all feeling, the pressures, and I'm excited to see that you're working with the conditions of the pandemic in your work. I expect that this is not where you started, but that this is where you ended up towards the end. So this engagement with the moment that we're in is really rich and strong. And, it's exciting to see that. One thing that occurs to me as you were talking is, you were talking about using the artificial, materials of bronze and 3D technologies as a metaphor, for the kinds of life that we lead at the moment. But it also occurs to me that there is something more than metaphoric about your work. When we think about bronze, when we think about 3D technologies that use plastics, for example, or even the digital archive that uses, various kinds of, materials from the earth to produce its digitality. These are things that leave their toxic trace on our bodies, right? And the pandemic, of course, is, us becoming frail in relation to viruses, in relation to the kinds of, environmental conditions that have brought us to this point. So, I'm excited to see that you are working with this material, and I want to push you to think further about, this going even beyond metaphor, right? Like how can we think about these as actual performances of life, the liveliness, the vitality of bronze, the vitality of, these material plastics, rather than them as kind of just artificial and dead matter versus the human life. So that, that kind of strand of thought, I think is really productive to work with as you move, further into your practice after this moment, because this is not an end, obviously, but a beginning for other things. So I will leave you with that thought.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. And now we'll hear from Shaelyn.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for sharing with us, Cameron. I just want to echo Sara's thanks. I guess I have some more questions for you that I would love to hear more about. I mean, I love that these works are so rooted in this moment that we've all been living through, thinking about monuments, how we redefine those in the contemporary moment. reflecting on how all of our lives have changed under COVID. So I'm curious if this practice is of interest to you, like outside of this historical moment that we're living in right now, these smaller 3D printed tableaus versus, like, it sounds like you were making larger busts before. And if it is of interest to you, like, how would you think of maybe adapting or changing your practice or the process, or would you?
It's interesting because the project started with the idea of just capturing being, and then being became more interesting. So I think the practice kind of stays the same moving forward. It's just hopefully there'll still be enough interest in how people are just existing after this kind of grand historical moment has passed, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And then what about scale? Were you working on a larger size before? And like, is this smaller size of interest? Does it speak maybe to like the intimacy of these moments that you're capturing, or?
I think the smaller scale does speak to the intimacy, and it's something that I've been coming more to terms with. I've never been able to work very large in the 3D prints just because I haven't figured out the modularity softwares yet. So building it in parts hasn't been quite as much of an option to me. But the more I do the small scale artworks, the more I like how kind of intimate and non-threatening they are. There's something about the life-size bronze sculpture that takes up so much space and inserts itself so kind of heavily into a conversation that I think I'm trying to move away from as an artist.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, Shaelyn, that's it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Shaelyn. Okay, now we'll move on to Freddie Lopez. Freddie is a queer Chicanx interdisciplinary artist that gravitates toward the themes of nostalgia and queer identity. He is based in Oakland, California, and has studied art at the San Francisco Art Institute, California College of the Arts, and the Beaux-Arts de Paris. Freddie?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get started. Cool. So first and foremost, I just want to start off with everything that I do is process-based and in a state of constant evolution. So I'm just going to start off with old work that has, proceeded into what I'm doing now. Cool. So the first kind of sketch that started off everything is the sketch from line 4. And essentially, while I was, in the Parisian metro, a lot of my work has to do with grounding ourselves mentally and providing solace among things that are the mundane. So from this sketch, something that I had taken account of in the train moving, I really thought that was beautiful. So then I worked with, the same idea of like how to ground yourself, but also, highlighting materiality and mark making for me, because for me that represents the artist's hands, memory, and I really just like to show off how clay can take form. So this is line 4 with the ceramic and oil paint. And then another big part of my growth, I would say, is with in preparation of my work Adapting Is. And this is kind of a work that, references adapting in a mental and a physical state. This was also during the last month that I was on study abroad, but also just thinking of how things have changed for me mentally in a new place, in a new culture, and just artistically, but then physically, looking at how the body, queerness, and myself has changed from that but kind of still wanting to reconnect with that childhood curiosity of nostalgia, you know, like playing with forts. So these are just a little bit more of mocks before the final. So this is adapting is presented with photographs and installation as well. And then in this, I, you know, meticulously and carefully deconstructed it because I wanted it to read, you know, as playful, but intentional, and also kind of like a loop, a constant, you know, because you could read it from left to right, from the photographs to the foreground. And then I would like the sculpture, you know, to refer to the first photograph. Yeah. Another big part of kind of relating onto this theme of nostalgia has to do with the idea of home for me and how that can, you know, relate to solace, but also just kind of figuring it out for myself, what home means for me mentally, but also, you know, through expectations of form and memory. So with this piece, it's a sound piece in the sense that there are recordings from my family home, very like indistinct conversations, or even just, you know, like the sounds of family walking above me on hardwood floors. So I'll play like 2 minutes of this. Can everyone hear that? So then, you know, a constant theme as well is this idea of time and an uneasiness with the present. And another method of grounding then for me was, you know, having this idea and representation of a ticking clock, not only perform time presently, but then, you know, in the performance itself, the sound is then relayed into what I'm listening to while I'm performing this piece. Which has to do a lot with my most recent series. And what I've prepared for you guys today is Entonces ¿Qué? So what now? With itself also, you know, having multiple stages of life that acts as an ever-going and ever-evolving piece. And its roots, you know, it started with these collaborative drawings in the sense that either they're started with someone who does a leaf rubbing, and then from there I'm extrapolating form, or, you know, I'm becoming informed and drawing influence from the snow outside of my house on a tree, or even just, you know, memory of an experience with either a friend or, you know, an experience at a park. So a lot of it, you know, having to do with the environment itself. So then from those sketches, I extrapolated form, just trying to see how, you know, I could not only pull form from the drawings, but try to get in the same mindset to, you know, related these ideas of collaboration, now kind of refined into ideas of like tension, balance, and unity that were kind of already present there. So from that, I then created these pieces, and this is a progress image as well. Some more. But, you know, then with the ceramic works, I wanted them to stay intentionally open and intentionally, you know, representational in the sense of, yes, they can relate to as two forms, but also one form in the sense of like a tension within the self or a balance of the self, but also how, you know, we can have unions with each other or unions with another person, a friend. That was like the guiding kind of metaphoric mentality that I took when I created these. But also, you know, recalling to memory in a sense to kind of understand the present, because I feel like I'm always thinking of had or in the past. So I think little by little, I'm trying to, you know, find the line between a good, uncomfortable present and, you know, like confronting the uneasiness of it. Sorry. So the last one is called I'll Try, on ceramic, of course. This one is I'll Be. And this one is I'll Hold. And I just want to say thank you again to my parents, my mom, who got me my first watercolor palette and all of my coloring books, and my family. All of my teachers that I've had have been so amazing. And my friends have always been the biggest cheerleaders ever. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Freddie. This time we're going to reverse the order of the respondents. And so Shaelyn, could you give us your response, please?
Sure. Thank you for sharing with us, Freddie. I love that body of work that you shared. I think it has a really understated elegance and quality to it that's really working. And I also really appreciate that it seems like your practice is really multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about the relationship between, like, for example, you talk about the drawings and the sculptures, or the sculptures originating from the drawings. Do you see, yeah, can you just tell me a little bit more about the interconnection between those two practices? And if you lean in one direction more than the other?
Yeah, so those drawings were actually, the first two were created in the fall. Sorry, I live right by park. But I saw specifically the finished drawings, I'll say, acted as kind of a base point for then what became the sculptures. But even with my drawing, I see it kind of as, you know, like at the same level on par with my sculpture. It just so happens that with this piece, it was just when I presented it first, that was its pre kind of evolution into what it is now. So I see them kind of informing each other. And more so, I relied on the drawings to get me into the emotional state to perform the sculptures. And, you know, like, especially in the hand making and the mark making of, you know, either knuckles or the highlights, and presenting that kind of calls back, or it does call back to the very like obvious material of the color pencil, or even, you know, carbon pencil in there.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you. And then something else I was thinking about, and I'm curious if this is something that's on your mind as well, is it seems like there's this sort of tension of binaries in your work. With the video, it's like you're thinking about maybe the space of being inside of a home or a building, but you're also outside. So there's this binary of being inside, outside. And then you also talk about like past and present sort of maybe being on your mind a little bit in your work with nostalgia. And, I think binaries can definitely also play into queer theory or queer identity, pushing back against that. So I was just curious if this is like something that you're interested in, if that's something you're actively thinking about, or maybe if it's something you might want to explore in the future.
Yeah, I think definitely the idea of like queerness was a little bit more prevalent in my first work or the second work that I shared, Adapting Is, in that just kind of a launching point once again to get into, like a state of collaboration and self-expression mentally. So, like going away from that, and like I think now I'm moving more into collaboration with the self and others, not really promoted by like queer identity as so much as before, but now more so like, I guess it's more not spiritual, but like inner self, whether that's like, and I see grounding through anxiety as union, because even in the sculptures that I shared, like the union itself was almost always at the bottom as a base. But yeah, it's interesting about the outside and inside, because that was also done in my backyard in my house. My house isn't the one behind it, it's the one that you can't see over here. So I thought that was very interesting. And that was also the reason why I decided to do plexiglass, was to have these hand sewn, like fabric scraps that, was lying around our house. And I was like, I want to do something with this. Like I've seen this cloud blanket since I was like 7 years old. I kind of want to go back to that, because I've just had, I think for me, objects draw nostalgia for me. Just because I've always moved around, so for me it's that's kind of how I keep the memory.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Shaelyn. And now we'll have a response from Sara.
Yes, hi, Freddie. Thank you for sharing your work. I really enjoyed the poetics of touch and your, performance kind of trajectory that we can see in your work. The combination of performance and sculpture and your use of ceramics and the poetics of that is really nice to see. I wanted to, kind of highlight something that Shaelyn was saying, which is, the home can be a charged place for queer bodies, right? And there is a sense of temporality that goes throughout all of your works. There's this attention to time with, your video piece that you showed, keeping time, making sculptures, performances. These are all timekeeping practices. And of course, there's a relationship between temporality and the home, right? The home is what keeps time of our bodies sometimes, it's where we begin our life, is where we kind of keep looking back at in order to keep that time. And so I want to encourage you to, think further about that relationship. There's a lot of interesting scholarship around queer temporality out there, Elizabeth Freeman, Jack Halberstam, many other people have thought through this idea of queer temporality. So while you're gesturing towards the end of your response to Shaelyn as having moved away from, thinking queerness and into a different kind of, concept, into spirituality, I would say that I still see these themes present, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can work together, and be there together. So if we have time and you want to respond to that, wonderful. If not, I will leave you with those thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful. I really appreciate that response, especially the idea of home. I think for me, it's always kind of just been, you know, as timekeeping. I think that is wonderful because I find myself even, looking through old family photo books when I'm visiting Wisconsin. But no, I definitely, especially in my newer ceramic works, I can still see how, one can attribute that to queerness. So yeah, I definitely am interested to kind of see if I can, purposefully retain an aspect of that and see if it, can further the work.
Okay, Freddie, thank you. And thanks to Sara. I guess we'll now move on to our next presentation, which is by Jia Qian, who was born and raised in Chongqing, China. She is currently based in Oakland. She hopes her work awakens emotions that are hidden in ourselves and others. Jia?
Yep. Okay. Share screen. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Jie. Before showing my work, I would like to share that how I developed an interest in art. When I was 13, I started attending some like drawing studios in the city where I grew up. This is kind of drawing I used to do for many years, and this is now. And I didn't have fun by doing those realistic drawing at all. And because I was in a mindset of like a good drawer equals a good artist. But after I came to college, I quickly realized that that's not it is. So in order to express my thoughts and feelings more freely, I decided to major in sculpture about like 2 years ago, which is something I thought I would be like terrible at it. But also it would be a good experience and learning for me. And in my art, I like to explore my memories and desire emotions. I hope that while exploring myself internally, my art can also make people experience the most original feeling that art brings to us, and the question, what is human and what does it mean to be a human? I attempt to awake our deepest emotion and that we have hidden away from others and ourselves. As a survivor of child abuse, and from being abused to being an abuser, and fighting with my mind has become part of my life. This is also drives me to make art that is emotional healing to myself and others. And I prepare 4 works to share today, to sculpture and to performances. First, I want to introduce some artists and artist movements that has guided and inspired me. The first one is the Russian abstract art movement's Primitism, developed by Kazimir Malevich, which is categorized by a simple geometric shapes and associated with the ideas of spiritual purity. The second one is my favorite contemporary filmmaker of all time, Kim Ki-duk. I like how he unflinchingly explored the consequences of our choice and behaviors in his movie. So let's begin with this one, a sculpture that is made out of metal, wires, and acrylic plastic and toy foams. I weld like hundreds of wires on a metal sheet, and I put a sphere with the toy foams inside into this dark and hairy space that I built. when I was making this piece, I had an inspiration from one of Malevich's painting called Black Circle. I interpreted the shapes from his painting in my own way. So I tried to focus on using the texture and objects to express and like oppressing feeling that I had a long time, but also could resonate with other people too. This is second sculpture I want to share. It's called Wardrobe. I took an existing wardrobe that I found and transformed it into a bloody red internal organ. It's made out of wood, paper mache, threads, canvas, found objects. On the bottom of this work, I built 2 boxes that allows the viewers to touch the found objects that I put inside. I recreated this intimate like space to commingle the familiar and the unfamiliar. In this piece, I want to talk about the inner fears that we are trying to hide away, and the violence in each one of us. My inspiration comes from my childhood like memory of exploring my family's wardrobe. In their wardrobe, I have found some like secrets about them, but also spoke to them as a human beings, not just the parents or siblings. So the third one I want to share is a performance piece called Searching. In this performance, I searched every object and the space in my bedroom, and from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional. After quarantine, I started to think about like what I really want in my life, and to understand that, like I think I have to know what I have been like looking for in my life. So I started with all the objects that I purchased with the question, what I'm looking for from those things, and how important those things are like to me. So there's some video. It's a 40 minutes, so I split it, like speed up, and can show you some of it. Yep. Okay. So the last one I want to share is an ongoing performance piece that I'm working on right now. I'm trying to make a series of performance piece that talks about the madness caused by the isolation and the loneliness during this quarantine. I shot those performances in a different time period of the day. So here are some examples. I can shoot some clips. This one I made like in the early morning. I dress up like a chicken and just start jumping in my room. And the second one, what I do.
好，好，很好，非常好，好，好，很好，非常好，好，好，很好，非常好。你是最棒的，你是最优秀的，你是最独一无二的，你一定会成功。
This one I This one I call wall breaker. I have this inflatable thing that my friend gave it to me. I use a mask to cover the inflatable page in the back. Yeah, it's in the walls and material on the hair. This one is called I Was All Over You. Just walk in the room and I use the sugar to write a sentence. Wrinkle. You're finished. Yeah. And that's all. And thanks for listening.
Thank you, Gia. This time we'll start with Sara and her commentary.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jeff, for sharing your work. It's so excellent to see you use the window at this moment in time as a place of interaction in a time of quarantine and during this pandemic. You know, the window, the balcony, the roof, these are all very liminal spaces that kind of interface the private sphere with the public. And in times of, you know, political repression, for example, these are really areas that people use to activate social movements, right? You know, I'm thinking of, you know, chanting from windows, chanting from rooftops, creating a kind of communal solidarity with other people when you can't go onto the street, right? And the street being dangerous because, say, you're, you know, living under a pandemic, or you're living under some kind of a, you know, police state, or a moment when you can't go outside. So this use of the window in your performance, kind of going in and going out, is really rich. I really encourage you to explore that further. But I also really liked your earlier works, because it seemed like, you know, you had a different kind of approach to, you know, more sculptural kinds of works. And, you know, the first one that you showed with the wires and the hairy dark space, and the second one with this internal organ, you know, depicted in the form of a wardrobe, they reminded me a little bit of Mona Hatoum's work, who also deals with domestic violence, right? So she, you know, uses domestic objects, blows them up into these large scales like a grater, and she blows it up and it becomes a grater for human bodies. So, you know, she's really interested in turning domestic objects on their head and showing the kinds of violence that they can actually produce. So, you know, when you were talking about your own experiences of domestic violence and bringing that into the space of your work, I really kind of made that connection and felt that you could, you know, I'm sure you're familiar with these works, but there's an affinity in her work that I see you working within. So if you want to say anything about that, that's great. Otherwise, yeah, continue. This is great work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those pieces with us. I think your practice is really brave and powerful. And I especially appreciated this sort of tension between the playfulness that starts to come through in those last video pieces that you showed with the window. I thought those were especially striking and successful. And I'm really struck by this element of body bodiliness or the body that sort of runs through your sculptural practice. I know you mentioned the suprematists as inspiration, but I'm curious if you've also given any thought to the feminist implications of that approach. I think especially, you know, sort of the objection that can come through in showing like a dark, hairy piece or something that's open and appearing bloody. I think that could be an interesting avenue for you to explore if you haven't thought about it already.
Actually, I got a lot inspired from like Louis Bourgeois and even Eva Hayes, and yeah, they're really great artists, also really good at like exploring their emotions too. And then yeah, but there's too many artists I want to talk about, so it's just sort of like two.
Yeah, I get that. And something else that struck me about your I guess the sculptural pieces as well as that video where you're sort of like sifting through the objects in your room is this idea of sort of anthropomorphizing things or like giving life to objects or human life to objects. I'm curious if that's, something that you're also thinking about.
No, I think so. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Shaelyn. We'll move on to our next presentation then. The next presentation is by Carlos Daniel Perez-Boza, who is a community artist from Puerto Rico, who's lived in Brooklyn, the Bronx, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. He's awarded with the CCA Diversity Scholarship, the Clothier Family Endowed Scholarship, Creative Achievement Award, a Ruben and Muriel Sabin Foundation Scholarship, and Robert Rawls Memorial Scholarship. Carlos?
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. Thank you everybody for coming here, being here. I want to give a special thanks to all my family members that are in the audience, my friends, my peers, and my supporters. Without further ado, I'm going to go and share my presentation. As a self-taught artist, I make art in response to what I've encountered throughout my life. I am a person of color born in Puerto Rico, living in the United States. I am Afro-Caribbean. My body of work tackles the many forms of oppression such as police brutality, systematic race, the wealth between the gap, the wealth between the rich and the poor, colonialism, and the aftermath of pain, loss, and suffering, courage, and resilience. I envision a revolutionary moment, an apocalyptic-like atmosphere of post and present and the future. My composition borrows from the tarot cards. This allows me to have full range of creativity within the layouts of the artwork. Religion, characteristics, and deity frequently symbolizes hopefulness and a malice. As a community arts, I transfer my studio practice into space. As a muralist, a teaching artist, curator, and ambassador of my own guerrilla style art projects, and performer, I often ask myself how much space can I occupy within the public setting. I design installations in which the audience and the viewers interact with the material I provide, blurring the line between the spectator and the performer. So I have a project here that is this candlestick. When the stadium was demolished, Reggae Park managed to grab some of the chairs, and I did a platform for this project in 2014, and then I revisited this project in 2017. So I took the chairs to Dolores Park, and I called it The Bloody Waves and Bleacher Report. Pretty much having a conversation, sparking identification, homelessness, police brutality, just within the city of San Francisco. I then took the practice where a new project where I did a guerrilla style art show. This was throughout time trying to get into spaces and show artwork in gallery spaces. So I decided to take this project to my own hands. And so I decided to give a pop-up art show, more of a street gallery art style. So I went to 25th Street and Lilac in San Francisco, where I then mounted artwork onto these walls and did it all about guerrilla style. Then I took the practice into the teaching artist role, where I partnered up with my wife, Nicole Rose Gellermino. She was teaching at the time at Gateway High School, charter school in San Francisco. And we was talking about this project of what global warming looked like if it had a monster, or what kind of form or shape would it take. And so it was about a 4 to 5 week program. So the students started with week 1, where the students were doing their research. By week 2, they was creating and having a dialogue with the materials. And week 3, they were pretty much hands-on, just full-on painting. And this is the aftermath of what they created. I started taking my practice back into the facility in CCA and the institution, and then I started to create with the support, at least, of the chair Linda, and having access to have a studio. As a community artist, I was fighting my way to get a studio. I'm not a painter, but my work reflects on painting, and I embody painting as a practice through my community arts. And so I created Into the Void so that the viewer can have kind of an insight of what it is that I'm creating, what world I'm living in, and kind of like present it all like in the grand scheme through color, fine arts, night, and also a little bit of street arts involved in it. This next piece is called Open Studio, and I was in a way kind of critiquing the space in CCA where artists are constantly trying to fight for studio space, and some artists are either lucky enough or some artists are not. And so what I did was I kind of took it into my own hands for at least a week, where I created a space within the facility where I was welcoming students, faculties and teachers and staff just to come and visit the space. This space particularly worked, and it helped out just anybody that just wanted to sit there throughout their cafeteria moment, their lunch break, their in moment of class. The materials was there to everybody to interact with. And I really wanted to kind of like bring this street art approach in a way, and kind of like this rawness, kind of marrying the whole fine arts kind of idea as well. The work itself is really symbolic. I grew up in the Bronx, and I had a really hard life growing up, losing my mother. And so street art was one of those things when I would go on the 4 train going to my dad's house and always seeing graffiti on the top of the buildings. And so this was a moment where my mom had passed away, and so I was stuck in my practice. And so how can I go back to make artwork? And so I went back to the original foundation of what I knew, and it was being playful through materials and creating street art. I want to say thank you for everybody that were here. I appreciate everybody that's still in the audience. And without further ado, I would like to stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Brian.
I think Shaelyn goes first this time.
Hi, Carlos. Thanks for sharing your practice with us. I think, wealth inequity and structural racism and systemic violence are some of the most pressing issues of our time. So you are, contributing to really critical conversations through the work that you're making. And my first question for you is related to the sort of public intervention pieces that you showed. So the bleachers and the pop-up on Lilac are the two that I'm thinking of. I'm curious, as a curatorial student myself, I'm curious if you left any signage that, like, how would somebody that's walking by know how to engage with these works, or that they were supposed to engage with these works? And I'm also curious if you've ever um, experienced or played with sort of watching people engage with them from a distance without them knowing that you are the maker of those pieces.
Yeah, thank you. The open studio was the spectator aspect. That was after the Lilac and after the Dolores Park. The one in Lilac was more of like a spontaneous act, and it was interesting because there was a tour guide for murals, and as I'm setting up, no one wanted to have a conversation with the artists, but they want to go and see artwork in these spaces. So that was kind of an interesting perspective, like kind of observation that I took. That one went on social media, that I just posted it up, and just like from a stream of people conversating and saying, hey, come out. And that's what happened. The one for Dolores Park, it was literally like up on a corner. I think it's right where the Muni stops, the train, the Muni stops. I forgot what's the actual street on that corner, but it was right at the corner of the entrance. So it was more about like people just coming in and having the idea of like what's happening in this space. So I kind of provided a platform or a stage so that anyone and everyone can interact with. But yeah, I really think it's really interesting having the spectator come and look at the work as myself being the spectator. I tell stories, and I don't want to take full credit for these stories that I'm shedding light on, because they're not mine as I was showing my students' work. But it's also really interesting how the viewers and how everybody interacts with the work also. Thank you.
And so related to that, I have just one more quick question about the role that community plays in your practice. The pop-up show, especially like 25th and Lilac, that's a neighborhood I lived in for a number of years and is very near and dear to me. So I'm curious if you thought about or considered engaging with any of the organizations in that area, like Precita Eyes, I think of as like maybe being a great collaborator for future projects for you.
Yeah, very quick and short about that project. The project itself was kind of a critiquing of like, why wasn't I invited? Because, and it wasn't for pittiness, but it was also because I had artwork on that same specific wall that was just black and white. And so I partnered up with Precita Eyes. And so they repainted the work without having the artists know that they were going to paint the work. So I took it further to be like, all right, let me go ahead and see this and put this out there. And so I met the curator, and I was, eventually granted to have a show at their gallery.
Thank you, Carlos.
You're welcome. Thank you, Shaelyn.
Thank you, Carlos, for sharing your work with us. It's, again, with all of the other works that we've seen, it's really nice to see everybody kind of engaging with different forms of community, actually, that they're engaging with. So I wanted to ask you a few questions. One is, how do we do community engagement in the time of COVID, right? When we can't come together, we're online. What were your challenges this year in relation to the kind of work that you do? And I'll let you answer that, and then I'll talk to you more.
Yeah, thank you, Sara. I think that, we all have a little bit of community arts, or whether that's, the quote unquote, what everybody is doing at some point, whether if it's talking 6 feet apart or just being close to each other and giving each other hugs. And so I've had projects where I've just literally taken materials like a chalk, and I started tracing lines and coming around the space and leave the chalks there. And individuals are like having a conversation with me within the distance. And chalks are there for them to pick up also to make lines with me as well. So those are kind of like the nuance that I've been going about, but also like in community arts, like, I go on Clubhouse sometimes and I have conversation with people where people are just even coming together and having community there. So community arts doesn't have to necessarily be in a physical space. Now there's this metaverse that we're coming into because of the pandemic. And so I really think it's the challenge for me, or not really, I think what is going to be interesting is coming out of this post-pandemic and kind of fusion and figuring out how community arts is really going to be impactful to kind of revisit and re-rich, kind of like just give back to the community and heal the community.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, you know, like, I also kind of wanted to ask you about the different kind of traditions of community art that you engage with. You mentioned a few different things like, you know, street art, and you know, I see a lot of collaborative work. I really in particular like the one where you're working with people to envision, you know, if global warming was a monster, what would it look like? But I also wonder if you see yourself within the kind of, you know, our historical traditions of community art, like for example, you know, relational aesthetics, or, you know, movements like that that recently have been fed up with, you know, artworks as being fetishized and presenting objects, but really wanted to interface with different people. So I'm curious about what kinds of, you know, traditions you see yourself in, or are in conversation with, or are trying to actually critique and intervene in.
Yeah, I think when it comes to critiquing the work that I'm strongly like opinionated about, like there's not a way of me being selective, but I have to like kind of like understand where my role is also, you know. I think that collaborating and working in collaboration with Black Lives Matter is a really important attribute to me also. But also I loved working with students that I come up from broken homes, and so like it's not about me at this point, it's how I can necessarily give them the tools and the access to succeed in the things that I couldn't have when I was growing up also. So these conversations constantly go on, and I'm the Pisces, and I think that I have so many different avenues and I wear so many different hats, you know. Being at CCA right now has just been like, how can I get my academics done, you know? And now coming out of CCA, going back into the field that I used to do 4 years ago, I'm really energized now that I'm in LA. So I'm definitely looking into different avenues and figuring out like where I can finally point myself into the right place so that I can start doing the work that I truly want to do. That makes sense.
Okay, thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Brian.
We have one more presentation tonight from Jordan Barram. Jordan is a multimedia artist majoring in printmaking. She transferred from SFAI. She works with ideas of gender and sexuality with themes of fantasy, mythology, and storytelling.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks everyone for being here. Right. So today I'm going to be showing excerpts and sharing details from my upcoming graphic publication entitled My ET Ex-Girlfriend, which is a passion project evolved out of a year in solitude and the heightened awareness of my own and our own battle with normalcy. I grew up in Richmond, California, in a well-read family. We used the TV for VHS tapes of VeggieTales and not a whole lot else. Books were my favorite part of life from a very young age. Even if they didn't have any words, I would spend hours investigating the illustrations and things like that. By 5 or 6, I moved on to chapter books and novels, getting so lost in a story that regularly I would not be able to hear my mom talking to me in the passenger seat of the car she was driving, or hearing my teacher's ending reading hour until 20 minutes too late. So as I grew up and time was less expendable, and of course the internet became a thing that I had access to, those books turned into movies, and then from there into TV shows, particularly shows like Adventure Time, Disenchantment, Bob's Burgers, things of that nature. Since basically forever, I've been immersing myself in imaginary worlds that were so real to me in so many undercover and emotional ways, especially when real life wasn't as safe as I needed it to be. As a result, my work has always dealt in some way with narrative, visual storytelling, and fantasy realms as a tool for self-identification and reflection, regardless of its medium. My ETX Girlfriend is an exploration of friendship, sexuality, and the self-esteem to discover both by using imagination as a safe alternative to reality. The creation of this story began as a way to validate my own feelings of isolation, attraction, and ultimately confusion around what is quote unquote allowed by pulling iconic imagery and references from movies, books, music, and other storytelling devices. This soon to be comic book is the story I would have wanted and still want as a young queer person. With this story and stories like it, I'm working to diversify the narrative we provide for ourselves, our peers, and our future by destigmatizing identities, experiences, and relationships larger society does not recognize or support. So this mostly textless narrative relies largely on body language and facial expression for communicating the plot and consists of 6 main scenes. It follows 2 young femme characters, Toby, as pictured here, and then an alien whose name we never learn. I refer to her here as ET Girlfriend, ET Girl, and other versions of the same. So those 6 key events are as follows. Number 1, we meet our main character, Toby, walking past a park, and we see them exchange glances with a 3rd character before continuing home whilst reading. Number 2, mystery ET Girlfriend appears the next morning and develops an attachment to Toby after seeing them through the balcony window. They quickly become friends and travel around together via bicycle. This is number 3. Number 4, they explore the nearby woods. Meanwhile, for a brief moment, Toby wonders if ET Girl is less excited about their friendship than she is about this new planet. Number 5, ET Girl's energy grows as she explores until out of excitement, she swings around and kisses Toby before they return home together. And then the 6th, Toby wakes up one morning or the next morning to find that ET Girl has disappeared. And then we cut to Toby walking past a park, again, the same park as pictured here. And then in the very last scene, to conclude this story, they break away and initiate conversation with that 3rd character that we met in the first scene. Subtle visual references from my personal influences of classic stories, religious texts, urban legends, mythologies, and fairy tale tropes help to set the tone of my ET Girlfriend and hint at the unspoken feelings of the 2 main characters towards each other. So in this work, due to its autobiographical nature, most of these come in the form of inside jokes with myself during the making of it and may not translate fully in the finished product, but some things that are there is like the reference of the creation of Adam with the 2 hands, as well as for me making the vinyl/bookstore owner look like Rasputin, like the store close to my home in San Francisco. This story plays with the fluidity of our own fantasies and their power to affect reality by including books as a visual theme to allude to a sort of dreamlike or novel inception. I'm actively attempting to blur the lines between what is imagined and what is experienced. I also think you can tell a lot about a person by the spaces they frequent and inhabit. Empty rooms communicate in their own kind of language, and I've created a variety of them. Some to tell us about our characters. And others to tell us about the relationship to the world around them. These spaces are built from memory and are an organic compilation of real places from my life and my imagination. My hope for this book is that it will find the people who want to say something without having to actually say it, and allow us to feel seen within its pages. For LGBTQIA+ folks, often our daydreams are more comfortable than navigating real life, its dangers, or even just its nuance. In them, we might not feel the same pressures to conform, to justify, or to perform parts of ourselves that just are. It took me a long time to come to terms with who I am, not because I wouldn't be accepted by my social environment, but because I thought I had to have myself completely figured out on my own before I allowed myself to visibly be. I wished my bisexual identity could be as nonchalant or as assumed as my perceived straight identity, but as of yet, we are not afforded that luxury. For many in the LGBTQ community, in order to be seen, we have to perform or spell out our experiences to essentially prove our existence. I had some issues with this, obviously, so I wrote myself/us a fairy tale, one that says exactly what I want to say without explicitly saying much of anything. Thank you so much for listening. A special thank you to Caitlin Mitchell-Dayton. She unknowingly gave me the permission to come into this side of my practice, and also to my parents for making all of this possible.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.
I think now we'll hear from Sara first.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jordan, for sharing your work with us. There is a vulnerability in the pages of your book that is really compelling. And it's hard to put yourself in that vulnerable place, and it's nice to see. As I was saying, earlier to Fredi, the home can be a charged place for queer peoples, and in your work, I would extend that to the body or even to the planet, since we're talking about ET, right? So there is a kind of disidentification that runs through the pages of your book that's really interesting to see. And autobiography is a form that tries to construct an I, right? It's not a form that tells the truth or the essence of a person, but puts forward an idea, a construction. And yours is very multi-dimensional, multi-species. It's full in that way, and I commend you for that. But there was one particular thing that really struck me, and I want to bring your attention to, and that is this moment where you were talking about, your own story as a child and how your imagination comes in to replace reality. And I'm sure you're familiar with Alison Bechdel and her work on Are You My Mother? And there is a scene in that graphic novel where Bechdel really goes into details about what that means, what it means to kind of, escape or displace reality into creative practice. And, I'm curious to know if you're familiar with this moment, and if you're not, I would recommend that you kind of look into that, because it's a commentary on creativity as well as this idea of displacement from reality that I think is really rich and that you're working with also.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I am not familiar, like it doesn't quite ring a bell, but I'm definitely gonna be looking for that now. And yeah, thank you. That's given me some stuff to think about as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sara. Now we'll hear from Shaelyn.
Hi, Jordan. Thanks for sharing your project with us. I love this sort of like dreamy aesthetic that you're working with in this project, especially it seems to speak to this really personal nature of the work, the intimacy of it, and leaving these little trails of inside jokes to yourself. I think that the gesture of telling a story through images without using words is also a really powerful one. Something that stood out to me in your presentation that Sara actually just pointed to is this place where you said that you were using imagination as a safe alternative to reality. And that strikes me because I think imagination can also be a really revolutionary space. I'm thinking of speculative fiction writers like Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. If you've read her work at all, I think might resonate with you a lot. But I'm curious if you can speak a little bit to the political implications of this project. Are you maybe interested in envisioning a world that we want to live in? Or yeah, I think it's maybe a question of more escapism versus sort of like world building, I guess. Especially thinking about this sort of interspecies romance or love that you're working with.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think you kind of touched on the two different sides and techniques that I'm trying to kind of marry at the same time. I, yes, am like creating worlds that are like idealized and things that I think should be parts of my, or would hope would be parts of my life, envisioning a world that I would want to live in, and at the same time creating spaces like that that can become an example in that kind of political sense, in a way that people can see that and envision something possibly different than they were told is the only way that things are meant to be, and being able to see a different option and either project themselves into that narrative or even take pieces from that and adapt it to their own understanding of what safety is and being able to be oneself in their environment.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shaelyn. Thank you, Jordan. Looks like we've arrived at the end of the presentations, and we'll just wrap up now. I think these presentations have been very moving and are a really good example of what happens in class. These presentations show how art can address deeply philosophical as well as socially and politically engaged ideas and activities. These complexities are what our everyday conversations in class are about. They are intense, real, and searching. The pandemic brought these conversations to a new intensity, which you have seen this evening. Thanks to all the students for their thoughtful work and ideas, and to CCA for providing the environment for such searching explorations. And thanks to Sara and Shaelyn, these great comments, really very much in the spirit of what we do in class at CCA, and I really enjoy the breadth of input that both of you gave. So thank you so much for participating in this, and it means a lot to me, and I'm sure to the students. And I want to just, thanks to the audience for coming tonight and for witnessing these thoughtful explorations, and for everybody joining together. So thank you from me and from all of us at CCA. And
unmute everybody, yay! Congratulations, awesome.
Way to be.
Congratulations, everybody.